Good afternoon, everyone. Welcome. My name is Jort Young. I'm the director of the Bloomberg Center for Cities, and we're so excited to welcome so many of you here for a wonderful event with Professor Marshall Ganz and Dean Rita Chenoweth. We're here to celebrate the book People Power Change that Marshall wrote. He's coming off a worldwide tour promoting the book, but now he's here. We have him. Marshall is a faculty affiliate of the Bloomberg Center for Cities. The center is dedicated to advancing knowledge on urban problem solving and city leadership around the world. And Marshall has trained over 350 mayors that have gone through our program over the past 10 years in the art and science of storytelling. Today, we're going to talk about a much broader perspective that Marshall has developed over the past decades of democratic renewal organizing practice. He's trained generations of organizers, and he's going to share his thoughts on where we are today and what is important into the future as we think about democratic renewal. We're also extremely honored to have as our moderator today Dean Rita Chenoweth here at Kennedy School. They are a political scientist specialized in democratic action, democratic resilience, civic discourse, and much more. So I can't think of a better uh, combination of expertise here in front of us than these two guests and colleagues. Before we get started, a warm welcome to everybody who's joining on Zoom. I believe there's hundreds of people tuning in. And you can ask questions using the Q&A feature on Zoom. We will moderate that. And Dean Chenoweth will bring those questions into the conversation as well. If you are here in person, then there are two microphones, one here and I think one on that side. And so just raise your hand and introduce yourself and make sure it is a question and not a statement. Then finally, there are two exits here in the case of an emergency. The first exit is the main entrance through which you came in, and there's another entrance and exit on this side. Please make sure your bags are tucked nicely under your chairs for fire safety and so forth. With that out of the way, please join me in welcoming Professor Marshall Ganz and Dean Rita Chenoweth.
Thank you so much, Jort, and thanks to everybody who's joining us today. Before we get started, I'll say I'm definitely not here as Dean Rita Chenoweth. I'm here as just somebody who's been working in this an adjacent field, to say the least, to what Marshall is doing, and he and I are just so lucky, I think, that we get to be here having maybe the continuation of a conversation that we're often having together. And about halfway through the conversation, we always look at each other and say, we should have this conversation in front of other people. Because every time Marshall and I sit down together, we realize that it's such a rich conversation, and we should have either recorded it or done it in front of people, and now we're doing both at the same time. So great job. So we're very grateful to the Bloomberg Center, I think, also for giving us the chance to do that and for organizing such a lovely event here today. So what we're going to do is talk a little bit about the book first and what motivated it, what you've learned since it came out and your conversations with a lot of people. We're going to talk a little bit about how you see it applying to city government and the insights of your book and your experience in this field. And then maybe we're going to talk a little bit more about where the country is at right now and some of the things that we're both reflecting on as we watch things unfold here. So first, Marshall, your book, People, Power, Change. Many folks in our audience, I'm sure, have read it. Maybe there are some who haven't yet had the pleasure.
Maybe.
And so I was hoping just to get us started, for those who aren't familiar with it, if you can just share what you see as the core message that emerges from the book. Maybe you can tell us a bit about what made you feel like you needed to write this book in the first place and what the core message is, and get us started that way.
Sure. Well, first, good afternoon. Let's try that one more time, but how about everybody in your own first language, okay? So, good afternoon. gets better. That's the music of the future. That's really where we're headed. So it's a real pleasure to have this opportunity with everyone online, Erica. What motivated me to write this book? Well, I mean, I was fortunate to find a calling early in life. And I use the word calling intentionally. And it was in Mississippi in 1964 and 65 when I found that dealing with structural and systematic injustice started with the people themselves. It started with the people whom I admired enormously, who had found the courage to make their voices heard, to stand up, to risk their lives. And it was young people. And when I connected with them, it was something like, it wasn't deficit, it was asset. It was like, I wanted to be like them. And in Mississippi, what I learned was that I could work with people in such a way, even being an outsider, which I certainly was in Mississippi, my mom was a teacher, and she called herself an educator because education comes from the Latin educere, which means to draw out, not to put in. It's not filling people's heads with stuff. It's drawing out of people their capability, their potential, what they can be, what we can be. And that's what I found myself doing in Mississippi, and I loved it. And because it only started there, then it was how do they combine with each other? And then how does that turn into sources of power? And so that was organizing. And I really got hooked on it. And I'll just say one thing about power, because that's a word that's so commonly misunderstood. I think it's actually pretty intuitive. If you need what I've got more than I need what you've got, who's got the power? If you need what I've got more than I need what you've got, who's got the power? And if it's reversed, who does? All right, so power, it's an influence created through interdependence. It's not something you have, it's an influence you can create. And the interdependence is needs and resources. And we live in an interdependent world, so there's almost always power dimensions to what's going on. Now, when it's more or less balanced, then we can create a lot more power with each other for credit unions, co-ops. But when it's out of whack and much of the resources are over here and the need is over here, it'll almost inevitably turn into domination, in which case we have to figure out how to rebalance it. And so what it means is you start not with what you don't have, you start with what you do have. And the best example of that I've learned from was the Montgomery bus boycott, where people boycotted the buses, segregated buses in Montgomery. It took a year for them to win, but they did. And people looked at that situation and they said, gee, all the power's over here. Where are they getting any power? Well, they boycotted for a year. Where do you think the power came from? Where do you think it came from? What do you see when you look down? Feet. Yeah. It turned out everybody had feet. Now, if you use their feet to walk to work and deny the bus company the bus fare, instead of using their feet to get on the bus and give the bus company the bus fare, individual dependency could be turned into the bus company's dependency on an organized community. So it was that combination of people, of relationship and collective effort, and how that could actually turn into power. And that's what really hooked me. And that's really what the book is. It's people, it's change, and it's power. And how do you put those things together, especially in times in which this whole way of looking at the world is under assault in so many ways. Obvious ways, just all these ways that our belief in ourselves gets undermined. The kind of dehumanization of the systems all over the place. It's kind of like appreciating our value as human beings and the value of other human beings, and from that, how we build power. So that's kind of where I think the challenge is, right? In other words, I don't think it's just a political challenge. I think it's a cultural challenge. I think it's deeper, which, frankly, Trump's destructiveness creates opportunity if we look at it the right way. Because the old system was not working. I mean, status quo was not working. That's why we're in the mess we're in. And so it isn't like, let's go back. It's we have to go forward, and we have to find new ways to move forward to shape the world into which we want to live, and not a world that's imposed upon us. So it just seems like a very deep core pivotal moment, and a real opportunity, a real important that we look at ourselves, we look at others, and we find where our common grounds are to build the power we need to shift things.
Yeah.
So people power change.
So you've now been on a multi-country tour. You've been to lots of cities. You've been to lots of places around really the world and in the United States, talking about this book, meeting with people from all walks of life. I'm sure having lots of really good conversations about the ways people see your diagnosis as correct, and maybe even some places where people are starting to do the types of things that you would prescribe in your book. So I was wondering if you could reflect back to us a bit about what you might have learned from your book tour now that we're a year out from its initial release. And if you can, talk about maybe a couple of stories that you've heard in your travels that reflect the type of approach to this that you think is very promising.
Okay. So it was mostly Western Europe and US, Mexico, Canada. I think that I was surprised at the hunger out there. We don't know what to do. We got to do something. We're trying to do something. How do we move forward? And that was true many places. Now, in Western Europe, I found it a bit different because there, where you have an electoral system that has members of parliament, but then it has actual political parties.
Yep.
I mean, real parties, where you become a member and you vote and you do stuff. We have marketplaces. We don't have parties. And we have candidates competing for the brand. It's a market exercise. It's not really a political exercise. So where you have a party organization, there's some balance between constituency organization and the electeds. We don't have that here. And so it puts an enormous burden on civil society to come up with the counterweight in order to make the thing work. Danny Slaughter's book, When Movements Anchor Parties, is a terrific historical look at the United States, at the fact that change rarely originates from within the electoral. It's usually movements that generate enough energy, risk-taking, commitment in order to produce that kind of change. But in Western Europe, I mean, everybody's freaked out by the right and what's happening. And a lot of times it's really a lot about going back to basics. Are we building relationships with each other and our constituents, or have we turned them into data points or text messages? I mean, I had the privilege of, after the general election, here they get together the campaign management from the presidential campaign. So I spent a day and a half in a room with the Trump people and the Harris people, which was kind of an interesting experience in and of itself. But it was quite evident that the Harris campaign had been trying to tell people how they ought to feel rather than listening to how they felt. So this thing about know your people and seeing them as people, not data points, not proxies for people, that whole domain of abstraction, it really takes away our humanity. And so putting people back into the process in a real way, or not back into, that's a lot more challenging. But I think it's where we have to go. Because if we don't, we become text messages, we become data points, we become abstractions that then are referred to as, oh, we know what the people think because we did a poll. Really? No, the people take from a poll the one little question that's answered under no duress and under no consequence. It's not real. So I think everywhere it is a question of digging back into who are our people, how do we build relationships with each other? And I mean, so many of our interactions these days are, they're they're transactions. They're not relationships. They're I'll give you and you give me, and building relationship is different. And I mean, an example I often use, one of my students will invite another student to have coffee. We have a great conversation. Hey, let's get together again next week. I got exams. Next week, I got people coming from out of town. Next week, I'll send you an email. So sociologically speaking, it just got dumped is what happened there. And see, what was missing was what makes the relation. What was missing was there was no joint commitment. See, relationships come out of commitment, and it's taking the risk to commit to another person and to commit to an effort, because it's really, nobody can predict the future, so you don't know. So commitment requires risk. Trust may grow out of that. It doesn't precede it. And so this kind of basic relational building work, people are hungry for it and they miss it. And it's not there. Again, I think Europe's in better shape than we are, frankly. I think our institutions are not nearly as committed to democratic practice. And they certainly have much more in terms of a basic social commitment. I think we're at a real turning point in this country where lots of chickens have come home to roost, as they say. But see, I think that optimism and pessimism are both arrogant because they claim to predict the future. It's going to be all right. How do you know? It's going to be terrible. How do you know? Hope is much more realistic. With hope, I'm guided by the insights of Maimonides, 12th century philosopher, who said that hope is belief in the plausibility of the possible as opposed to the necessity of the probable. It is always probable Goliath will win, but sometimes David does. It was improbable we'd elect a black man president of this country in 2007, but it happened. Hope occupies the place between fantasy and certainty. It's that domain of possibility that could be. And I think recognizing and embracing that, because sometimes we look for it, who's going to save us or what's the master plan? But most of us have had these experiences in our own lives if we look within. I mean, how many people here have ever had an experience of hurt? Let me see. If you were on the planet, you probably. What about experiences of hope? What about that? See, if the hurt weren't there, you wouldn't think the world needed fixing. And if the hope wasn't there, you wouldn't be in this room talking with us right now. So sometimes we look out there for what's in here and how we can give that to one another to create the creative capacity, the commitment to take advantage of this moment that we have to shape our future.
Yeah. I think one of the things that is true about how people sometimes interpret events is that there's some like big visible event and then something changes and they attribute the change to that big visible event.
Yeah.
What you just said reminded me of something my mentor, James Lawson, used to talk about, which is what he called the one-on-one work. And it reminded you of what you just said about relationship building. Concretely, what he would do, he was told when he got out of prison for being a conscientious objector for the Korean War, he started to, while he was in prison, he read Gandhi's autobiography. And that kind of helped him be motivated to join what he called the movement for American freedom, which is what they referred to the civil rights movement before it became renamed the civil rights movement. And Martin Luther King asked him to go to Nashville and desegregate it. And he was a young Methodist minister. And he went and he spent a year, instead of doing what was being done everywhere else and trying to import the sort of tactics that were, the bus boycotts and the other things, he thought, I need to get to know people in this community and what their concerns are. So he described taking a full year, spending his time going into the community as a pastor, basically, and an organizer, and meeting with people in their homes during the day and just asking them about the things that were of concern to them. And because he was going during the day, it was often women who were at home. And they would share with him while their children were sleeping or otherwise the biggest indignity for me is having to have my children wear ill-fitting clothes, because when we go to the department stores, they won't let us try them on. And when we come home and they put them on and they're too big or too small, they won't let us return them. And we couldn't afford it anyway. And he heard that over and over and realized there was something in there that the community would be able to activate around if he could organize them. And that's why the way that Nashville started was with actually boycotting the downtown business district and doing consumer boycotts of the department stores, which was not something that was happening in other southern cities, but it's what that community wanted to do. And he did the trainings and the church basements and the nonviolence trainings and everything else. And you can see this depicted in the movie The Butler. Actually, they show James Lawson, they sort of Jesse Williams' character, I guess, is depicting him. And the ultimate outcome of this is that the town and the folks that he worked with and the students that came in did ultimately do the lunch counter sit-ins and everything else, which were kind of paired with these other tactics. And they built this huge constituency that basically desegregated downtown Nashville within a year, um, officially. And they did it in a way that also negotiated and communicated with the press, with the actual business owners, that there wouldn't be like a public announcement. It would just happen because they didn't want to have their stores bombed by white supremacists and things like that. So they dealt with it in a way that worked and made it a sustainable outcome. And it started with the one-on-one work. And that was the thing he was also always so careful to make sure people knew, that you can't just go in and say, they're doing this tactic in this town, we're going to do it here and get the same outcome. And to me, concretely, that feels very much like what you're saying in terms of an organizing kind of practice.
Very much, Erica. And I actually slept on the floor of Jim Lawson's church in Memphis when we were preparing to go to Mississippi. And we partway down, we were in Memphis, and then we would go to Mississippi the next day. But it was Jim Lawson's church floor where I first connected with him.
What a legend. Yeah. Yeah. So let's talk a little bit about this. Like, we have a recent example in the United States right now of somebody who definitely used these organizing methods that you've been talking about. So shall we call them practices, organizing practices, right? And who has won a mayoral election of the largest city in the United States, and has done so kind of explicitly by using these methods. And I know it's been publicly reported in the august Harvard Crimson that you have been involved to some degree in sharing what you know with that campaign and your kind of private work. So what happens? What happens when you go from organizer to someone who has to govern a city? What are the things that are in common about those roles, and what are the things that are going to be challenging about those roles?
Just about everything is going to be challenging.
Clearly, that's true. But what's in common about it? Like, what will transfer well, shall we say?
I think that, well, first of all, the way they went about that campaign, Tasha Van Augen deserves a lot of credit. She was the organizing director for the campaign, but she learned her approach in the Obama campaign, 2007 and 8. And sometimes you got to wait a while for the return to come back, but it's still, when you invest in people, it's a good investment because it's a long-term kind of return. When you build a campaign like that, they have this enormous volunteer base. The numbers have been 100,000, 110,000, whatever. Not unlike what we did with Obama in 2008. Then the question is, what do you do with that? And in the Obama campaign, they decided to put it away. They decided not to engage it.
Can you say more about what that actually means, like to put it away? I mean, what does demobilization look like? How do you decide to do that? And what does it actually do?
Well, and it's what it actually does, you have all these volunteer groups, teams all over the country. Yeah. We're ready. And then the word comes, no, don't. We're in charge. We know what we're doing. We're going to take this organization, put it inside the Democratic National Committee, and we're totally uninterested in the Democratic National Committee. And so we're going to try to hold it here, kind of maybe. But there were so many calls and emails from people all over the country saying, "What's next? What's next? What do we do now?" And it wasn't responded to. So unfortunately, see, to me, that was a critical moment that was missed. And so here we have another moment at a city level that is similar in the sense that there's real people out there who are organized. So the question is, what do you do about that? Now, some people are going to come into government, certainly. You're the mayor, you want to have people that are aligned with you and so forth. That's going to happen. But not everybody. And we know the DSA organization was involved in the campaign, but it's not capable of absorbing so you have to confront, what do we do? That's what they're working on right now. They've set up a 501c4. They call it Our Time. And they're trying to figure out how is it that we build this organization that was in relationship with the mayor, but not dependent upon the mayor, so that there can be some kind of balance. It's as if you had a constituency party in relationship to an elected official. You would have balance. And so that's what they're trying to do. And it's hard. It's really important, because what happens otherwise is the counterweight to who's in office is all from organized interests of different kinds. And there's no popular organization. There's no mechanism. Now, in the old days, with the machines, right? You'd get in, you'd organize a machine. And that was how you got reelected. Well, that, is a bit out of fashion, shall we say, although it persists in different places. So to me, the question, how does an elected official maintain a relationship with an organized constituency that actually represents a community, in a real way? It's a real question in our politics at every level.
Well, and I think that the thing that's also tricky about it is the fact that, the people who are represented in that constituency have, conceivably just put their heart and soul into trying to get the guy in, and they're big fans, right? And that was their job, is to be the biggest fans of all time and get other people to be huge fans. And now they have to go into a posture where there may be some antagonism with regard to the person that they tried to elevate. And so how do you manage within the organization the fact that it's now going to be kind of the outside game, pushing the inside game?
Well, it's not unlike what happens where you have parliamentary democracies and organized parties. I mean, because there is tension, and it can be destructive, but it also can be a very important, healthy tension. Now, the question is how to come up with something like that here. I think when people are so highly motivated, they engage as they have, and they win, that's a big deal. But how can I say, if they're organized, they're also, well, my favorite Jesus quote, okay, is from the Gospel according to St. Matthew, chapter 10, verse 16, where Jesus is about to send his his apostles out to tell a new story. It's a new story. It's a new story. It's a gospel. And he says, if I'm to set you as sheep among wolves, you must be innocent as doves and wise as serpents. In other words, it's not an idealist. It's not a pragmatist. It's both. And that's the challenge. Because too often it's said, oh, you're idealists. Let's all be that. Oh, no. The tension between the two is where the action is. And then how you create that within organizations and make it part of the organizational culture and so forth. It's not easy. It's hard. Chris Robichaux and I, my colleague here, we do a new class here called Being Human. And one of the interesting things in final papers was, I just learned that there are questions that have no answers. How about that? How about that? So it's holding tension. Boy, is that important. Because the anxiety we have about uncertainty drives us to false absolutes. Oh, it's all this. Oh, it's all that. Well, in life, almost nothing is all this or all that. It's more where the engagement is, but developing the the heart muscles, the head muscles, to be able to hold that kind of tension and translate it into creative effort is not easy.
Yeah. Well, there's an interesting reverse relationship here too with the official who needs to build a constituency in order to push something through against all of the powerful interests. And there's all these apocryphal stories about who first used this formulation, but one of the apocryphal stories is that, FDR was encountering the civil rights kind of Black leadership and saying, I agree with you on basically everything you're saying with regard to a new social program, make me do it.
Yeah.
Right. And then Obama sometimes would refer back to that when he was dealing with different activist constituencies. He'd say, okay, I totally agree with you on gun control, or I totally agree with you on, on healthcare, make me do it. And the idea was like, build me a movement that convinces all of the other elected representatives and builds me power where I am in my situation to argue that this is the only way forward.
Yeah.
Now, but that also threatens to somewhat instrumentalize a constituency for particular things.
And I think it depends on what the commitment is and what the understanding is. That's where, if we actually had functional party organizations, it would be so beneficial, because that's how they would work. But, and there'd be tension and so forth. But there's a distinct entity over here that isn't just the machine. And I think we need that. We need accountability in our politics in so many different ways. Now, a mayor is in a position where he can certainly support, or he or she can support, developing an organized constituency. That would be great. That'd be good. But it's only going to be real if there's tension. In other words, if it's recognized that this is what this is.
Yeah.
In California, when we needed the California Agricultural Labor Relations Act, when I was working with the farm workers, we had exactly this relationship with Jerry Brown, who was then governor. And it was very much out here and then in there. And so then combined, we were able to make a real major breakthrough.
Yeah. How explicit was that, by the way? So in that context, for example, does somebody sit down with Jerry Brown and say, look, we're playing an inside-outside game here. We all agree. Let's when we say this out there, you'll understand. When you say this over here, we'll understand. Is it explicit, or is it just like you just go for it and hope for the best?
Well, Erica, it's a combination. And a lot of the most explicit is not, shall we say, in the record.
Well, I have no doubt that's true. That's why I'm asking you.
No, I think, Jerry's, still with us, a very interesting guy.
Yeah.
And certainly had a pretty deep commitment to what we were trying to do. But also, I think he and us were realistic about what was needed.
Yeah.
And so, it was like, it's like we're
got it sorted.
We're gonna come and have a sit-in, blah blah blah.
Yeah.
And there was an understanding.
Yep.
And I think that's often the case in politics, where there's understandings that are private, not public, but sometimes they go against the interest of the public way too often.
Right. Exactly. Right. Yeah. So can we talk just briefly about something you just alluded to, which is that maybe a mayor wants to build a constituency. So there's a lot of people who are holding office right now who would love to have the type of enthusiasm and popular support and organizing network that Mamdani is going to inherit as he steps into this role. If they don't have one, how do they get one? Is there a way for people in that position to recognize and acknowledge the agency that their constituents need to feel right now in this moment, and to basically support the building of community organizations, community organizing from that perch, right? So this is the reverse issue again. How do you get your community to be organized in the way that we're talking about?
Well, the starting point is they got elected somehow.
Right.
So there's already people out there. And presumably they got elected by a majority or whatever. So there's already people out there. And they're hoping for different things. So one question is how to engage with those people, do what I say or grow in relationship. Now, Pete Buttigieg
Ben,
in
South Bend.
South Bend, yeah, thank you. No, he was in our first cohort of mayors that we trained in public narrative. And so he invited our team to go to South Bend. And we had these sessions with community leaders in organizing and in public narrative and so forth. And our team has done that in a few other places, Albuquerque, Sioux Falls, I think. No, it's interesting, but it takes courage by an office holder to say, hey, get organized so we can be in dialogue rather than get organized so I can satisfy all these interests over here by telling you what to do. It's real leadership. I mean, the definition we use for leadership in our work is that it's about accepting responsibility for enabling others to achieve shared purpose under conditions of uncertainty. So it is not about the exercise of authority, it is about the exercise of leadership, which are not the same thing.
Yeah.
And when you have authority as a resource for you, it's a tremendous resource. How do you use it? You use it to disempower, you use it to empower. And it takes a lot of courage to do the empower thing, I think.
Yeah, no doubt about it. So we're going to go to audience Q&A in about 5 minutes. We'll use a method where we look at some of the online ones and we'll ask folks to come to the mic. So be thinking of your question. I'm going to throw out a big question for us to chew on, which I mentioned to you before, which is, can we talk about differences and similarities in organizing in a democratic context, like an established democratic context, versus a backsliding context and or an authoritarian context? You and I have both, we have both interacted with people from all over the world and people in the United States doing organizing and mobilizing in these different contexts, and they're different. So what do you notice as the most important similarities and differences?
Well, we've had the opportunity to work with people in the Middle East, in Egypt, in China, and where, it's tough.
Yeah.
And what has happened in my experience is that, first of all, there are red lines, and usually people know what the red lines are. In other words, they're going to know better than I know. And then the question is, what can you do? Well, I remember a rural literacy program in China that was organizing, a professional development program in Egyptian universities that was organizing. It wasn't called that.
Can I just say, when he says red lines, he doesn't mean like red lines on the backsliding. He means things that you're allowed to say and not allowed to say in the country. Right.
Yeah.
Just to be clear. Yeah.
Well, like organizing was not called organizing. Exactly. In China, it was called community something.
Yes.
No,
civic life or something.
People are very, very creative.
They are.
At least what I've found in different cultural contexts. But the work of connecting people, of bringing people together, of building infrastructure. My friend and colleague Nasreen Haj-Ahmed has been doing an online organizing class similar to my own, but it's in Arabic and reaches people in about 11 countries that couldn't be reached physically, but it's online. And based on that, developing an Arab organizers network. Now, it's all sort of under the water.
Yeah.
And like I say, you can get away with this, you can't. We were doing stuff in Syria for a year and a half before they started killing people there. We were working on developing a youth program, but then they started killing people.
Yeah.
And we stayed for another year working with folks, and then it was just completely impossible. So yeah, you recognize moments when how can I say, there's a difference between agency and power. And agency is being able to make choices, able to having the emotional capacity to make choices, not just to be responsive, not reactive, which is agency. Power is whether you have enough power to change things. So a critical choice that people make is, well, we have to comply for now. or, well, we can, because either one, radical compliance or, no, we got to tell them they're evil and blah, blah, that's not going to get you much anywhere. It's this capacity for judgment and balance and experience. You know, I was at MIT, Tim Berners-Lee was given it, the guy invented the World Wide Web. He was saying that machines can make decisions, but only humans can make choices. And what he meant was that a machine, the information it processes in the forms of zeros and ones. It's a calculating device, basically. It can get very sophisticated, but it's a calculating device. Human beings, we learn through our emotions, we learn through our bodies, we learn through our relationships, we learn through our experience. We're capable of judgment. And that's what he means by choices. And what we ought to be doing in universities is strengthening our capacity for judgment rather than trying to become as much like an AI as we can.
Great. Thank you, Marshall. So I think we'll move at this point to questions. There is a microphone right there, and that would be the best place for folks in the audience to go to. But if you are also situated where you can't reach that spot, we have some roving mics, so please raise your hand if you want to jump in the queue. It looks like we've got a question coming here, and then we'll go to a question online.
Hi, Professor.
Hi, who are you?
My name is Ray Saldana. I call San Antonio home. I'm here on a visiting fellowship. My question is this: you've talked about hope and pessimism and optimism. Where is in the continuum of what motivates action, fear and anger? Because it seems like fear and anger feels like it's playing an animating role in the folks who are really getting to office. Besides the example
No,
we've
it's
talked
good.
about.
It's very good. Fear is generally, well, let's say you're confronted with a challenge, with a potential threat. The fear reaction is usually one of fight, flight, or freeze. It's usually counterproductive. And I've just found in my own life when I make choices based on fear, they turn out to be lousy choices. Because fear it's a protective, reactive, I mean, it goes back to the saber-toothed tigers and all that. But when we began living with other people in communities, we had to figure out how to manage our fears. And that's where hope comes in the picture. How to manage the isolation that goes with fear. That's where love, solidarity comes in. We have to manage the sense of self-doubt. And that's where sense of self-worth comes in. And so what I'm saying is that there's a balance here. Now, but fear in itself is almost never a motivator for action. It's protection. How do I defend myself? Now, anger is a different deal because anger is, it's a response to a kind of dissonance. The world as it is, world as it ought to be. Anybody that was watching George Floyd be murdered didn't experience that as a source of anger, outrage. People will use the word outrage. That's important. There's something wrong there. But then the question is, what do we do with that anger? Do we connect it to fear, as our president does a really good job of doing, our current president? Or do we connect it with hope? In which case, then it becomes a source of courage and a source of energy. And see, that's where the power of narrative, the power of emotional language and emotional understanding and values is so important. It's real. There's a clip we use in our class from the movie about Gandhi, where he's confronting a very angry crowd in South Africa in 1908, Gaiety Theater. And what he's able to do is acknowledge the anger and then harvest the courage within it to turn into very effective nonviolent action. And that's kind of where it is. So anger depends a whole lot what you do with it. And when we're afraid to bring it into the room, that's the worst thing we can do, because then it gets suppressed and it's still there and it festers. This Gandhi example, he brought it right into the room, acknowledged it, and then was able to take people through a process of recognizing, oh, this can be a source of courage, but we can use it in a different way. I mean, nonviolence itself is such a bad translation of satyagraha, which means truth force. It's not non-anything. It's an alternate way. But those are key.
Yeah. I just want to mention one citation for you, which is a book by James Jasper called The Emotions of Protest. And in it, he talks about the types of collective emotions that are demobilizing versus mobilizing, and mobilization broadly conceived. And his argument is that, the things that demobilize people are fear and hopelessness.
Right.
And the things that mobilize people are anger and hope. But you have to have them both together. So it's exactly this.
Exactly.
The grievance that motivates somebody to do something they ordinarily wouldn't be willing to do, and the hope which gives them both the sense of agency and courage to do something. So those two together.
Yeah. No, I think that's right. This is kind of where our use of narrative comes in, because stories are not just entertainment. They're the oldest form of discourse we have once we had language. People have been telling stories since we have to speak. So what's it all about? Why is it so important? Well, it turns out that it was how we began learning how to cope with threat, with loss, with the unexpected. I mean, our earliest rituals were death. Somebody disappears. Oh my God, how do we deal with it? And we began finding ways that we could do the emotional work to counter the fear with sources of hope and possibility. And so what stories are doing, that's kind of what they're about. And the best example I can give, I went with my partner to the seafloor to watch the sunset. It was a beautiful sunset. It would turn orange and pink. That's moment number one. Moment number two, went with my partner to see the sunset, and a beautiful sunset, turned orange and pink, but it started to rain. I started to leave, but then she grabbed my arm. She said, wait a second, it's only rain. As long as we're together, we're good. See, nothing happened the first moment. It was descriptive. The second moment was a narrative moment.
Yeah.
Because there was a challenge.
Right.
I reacted fearfully. She reached out in love, and it wound up strengthening our relationship. And so it's the moral of the story is love can overcome fear. All in that little moment. See, so it's a form of emotional communication about how to find sources of courage to balance fear and all the rest of it. And, that's why, parents spend all that time telling stories to their kids. They could just give them a list. Don't do this, do that. That would work.
Yeah.
Yeah. Well,
That doesn't work.
no, it's all up here. I know.
Yeah, exactly.
So it's the emotional understanding.
Yeah.
That is really what creates agency or doesn't.
Yeah. So we have a number of questions online. We're not going to get to them all, but one that came through and refers a bit to our conversation is about how young people should find their way into organizing right now. So, one of the things that was true about the movement for American freedom is that they built a number of different architectures and infrastructures to be containers for youth leadership development and organizing, SNCC and, other things. And so the question is, what is the contemporary place for people to find themselves in?
I had the privilege of going to the Mamdani victory party on Tuesday night in New York. Now, by myself, I think I would have raised the median age substantially. In other words, it was full of young people.
Yeah.
So why were they there? Well, they were invited, into the campaign. They were valued. There was hope. There was hope. There was a sense of a future, that this is a way we can build. See, civic education, all that's all very important. But the real thing is really what attracts young people is really important.
Yeah.
To pay attention to.
Right. So none of us got invited, Marshall. So
I'm sorry.
But if somebody was trying to find something that recreates the things that you witnessed there, do you know of like what the most promising kind of sources are right now in the country? Like who would you send them to? Well, maybe don't say that too specifically, but there are clearly people who reach out to you and reach out to me on a regular basis, young people from all over the world and all over the country saying, I want to be a community organizer and, tell me where I can start.
other than read this book and
Yeah, we don't. I never say that.
and my online class.
Yeah.
No,
Right. Exactly.
no. But you're pointing to, I think, what is a real challenge, which are places where people can actually learn
That's it. Yeah.
and not just be used. There's a tendency to treat young people like a renewable resource. We'll just use them and then we'll get the next bunch. And that's awful. That's very common, unfortunately. So it's important to find those places. This campaign has been one such place. Some of the faith organizing that's going on can be such a place. But there are some unions can be such a place.
Yeah.
But we've just been doing a project with the Girl Scouts, okay?
Yeah.
The Girl Scouts, yeah. Well, turns out it's an organization of 1.9 million members.
Yep.
They fund themselves, their dues.
Yep.
They elect their leaders. It's an actual democratic organization.
Mm-hmm.
And they're trying to cultivate young women and girls in the practice of citizenship and democracy. And they realize that they have to then practice democracy in order to be teachers of it. Now, I never would have thought of that, but it was really a very interesting kind of discovery.
Yeah.
So, but there aren't evident, obvious places, unfortunately. That's something we really need to do. I think our schools should be doing a much better job. We now have a course at CUNY, organizing class that we're supporting there. We have one at Stanford, but universities and colleges ought to offer this kind of leadership, which they often don't. High schools can be great with this.
Yeah.
But it takes people who get it, who want to share it, who aren't afraid of it,
Yeah.
and see it as fundamentally necessary for a future.
Yeah. I mean, one of the things I think is so useful in what you just said is that it's not about going back to the drawing board. It's, sometimes there are longstanding institutions
That's
that
right.
have a huge
That's right.
membership who are eager to
Yeah.
begin some kind of transformation that is incredibly promising. I mean, there aren't too many civic organizations that have 2 million members just, that you can create from scratch. So anyway, this is just to say, I think something that you said that's really transferable to other civic groups is for organizations that are out there that have large bases, this is a great moment for them to really engage on youth leadership, development, democratic practice, and things like that, and not be afraid to do so.
Very much so.
Yeah.
One of the challenges, though, has been the development of the NGOs that are essentially nonprofit firms. And they're not democratic. They aren't self-governed. And, a lot of good people involved. But, de Tocqueville's whole thing was about developing habits of the heart required to make democracy work through association and through self-governance. And boy, we've gotten pretty scarce on that too. And so that's an area that really needs growth and development.
Yeah.
But look, there is hunger for it.
Yeah.
And any time that we've done anything out there, I mean, people they want to know how to count, how to matter.
Yeah.
In circumstances in which it doesn't feel that way.
Yeah. Let's go to the mic for our next question.
Hi. It's too tall for me. I think it's good to go.
Hi.
Hi, my name is Tasin. I'm an MPP1. So when this book actually was launched last year, I read it and I texted you in LinkedIn that if I come here, I will talk to you in person. And it worked out.
I'm glad you made it.
Yes. And it worked out fine. I got in. Anyways, so last year when Bangladesh was going through its political crisis and regime fall, I was a part of it. I was leading the youth wing of the government party. So I was wondering, when a political crisis happens, eventually the first thing you have to do, because people are quite smart, so you have to make sure that you sit, you take a step back and then you let people realize what's happening in the entire country. So this is one step. So I was wondering what should be the second step to rebuild your trust among people, at the same time build your reputation in a much more people-friendly way when you are getting back there after a crisis.
Boy, what a great question.
Thank you.
Yeah. could write a book about that. Well, it's hard. And I mean, because once trust has been broken, it's very hard to rebuild. And so you have to think, well, what are the sources of trust? Well, with people. I mean, it isn't just delivery. I know sometimes they say it's delivery, deliver the goods. Yeah, that matters. But it's sort of, is this being delivered to me, or am I part of this delivery? Was my voice considered? Was I seen? You know, this whole thing about being seen and being heard, people are starved for that. Now, so much political leadership doesn't see or hear. The consultants are around, they tell them how to package and how to, do messaging and all that stuff, rather than actually engaging and hearing people. And it has to be, how can I say, it's walking the walk. It has to be done. Otherwise, if it's just rhetoric, it doesn't work. Now, how you would do that in a particular context, I think, depends enormously on the context. Where are there opportunities to do that sort of work of building or rebuilding? But when trust has been broken, it's very hard to restore it without, I don't know, it's sometimes it's the people themselves that have to change. What I mean is sometimes an incumbent group that lost people's faith needs to step aside, and it can't be restored. And it's time for new people to come in and do the work. It's not uncommon. I hope this is helpful. I can see your concern.
No, I think I was not able to articulate it quite well. My point is, like, for example, in Bangladesh, there is only two party,
Right.
and one of them is like 35% supported by people, and another of them is also 35% supported by people, and the rest of the 30% is actually swing voters.
Same here.
So, so I was just wondering, like, probably it's some of the people who were not able to serve the government, like people, quite well, but there are also a part of your party who were able to serve the people quite well. So in that case, how do you differentiate your own self from the disaster that happened and then connect with people? Because there are 35% who are waiting for you to come in and
Wi-
save themselves.
Without starting a new party.
Yeah, yeah.
I mean, sometimes that's what you have to do. Sometimes because people are looking and judging, and wait a second, they're in this thing together. Who can I trust? I mean, look, there's no formula to answer that question. So much depends on context, so much. But, it's tough if, you're part of an organization that has blown it, so to speak. How do you take a new path, a real one? And that's where a new party may be needed. I don't know.
We don't know.
Yeah. Yeah. I would just maybe add something you said earlier about how movements anchor parties. I mean, one of the things that comes through there is that sometimes major realignments happen within existing parties. And
That's exactly
really hard to do, but it only usually happens when there is some major movement that's pushing, and that's happened in the United States with the Republican Party, with the Tea Party and sort of MAGA movement, both kind of insurgent movements building upon one another. They totally realigned the Republican Party, and so I think the same thing would be true in this country, at least for the Democratic Party, that it would be a movement driving the realignment, and I think that's usually something that would translate into other contexts.
That's really helpful. Where are you?
Yeah. So Marshall, we have a group of questions on here about what I think is like some serious anxiety, which I will confess I share, about the information environment and the challenges that arise from the problem of establishing shared fact bases.
Yeah.
For organizing, right? So it's I was thinking about the Nashville example and a particular episode that was a critical moment in what led to the negotiations of desegregating. What that critical moment was is that Alexander Luby, who was a Black lawyer representing students who were being imprisoned for participating in the movement, his home was bombed by white supremacists. And when it happened, the movement in Nashville immediately responded by organizing a silent march from his home to City Hall.
Yep.
And they got 5,000 people in that silent march. And actually, a silent march is a really
Very powerful.
powerful way to respond to an episode like that for lots of, and there's all kinds of like smart tactical reasons to do it too, which is you always know who the provocateurs are in a silent march, right? So they were able to maintain that discipline and control of the message. But there wasn't anybody in town who would have denied that somebody just bombed a Black lawyer's home for representing these people, and everybody knew who did it, right? That is like common knowledge that is a very important resource for organizing and for building those critical crisis moments of power that the movement can leverage over, in this case, the mayor, who they confronted on the steps of the City Hall and put on camera saying that he didn't agree that denying somebody business on the basis of their color of their skin could be a moral thing to do. And that was the first time he said it on record, and that was the beginning of that negotiation. So the thing to know in all of those cases, and as you alluded to with Satyagraha, truth force, Gandhi's wager was that the truth would come through and it would help to mobilize a constituency that would help galvanize the power of the movement. So if we are in a time when those truths are just not self-evident and they are contested over and over again, how do you confront that as an organizing challenge?
That's a challenge.
Indeed.
Gandhi once said, don't let the facts get in the way of the truth. Really, he did say that. No, he said that because what he meant by truth was the truth of what's happening.
That's right.
The real meaning of what's happening. And sometimes that can get lost in, look, I don't think, I think we're trying to figure that out.
Yeah.
I do think though that well, again, if you look at Mamdani's campaign, how much person-to-person stuff was done on a large scale. And, of people engaging with other people. See, so much, I think the power of so much of the social media is in the context of an atomized social world where it's all individualized and it's all isolated and the relational work that's needed isn't there but needs to be done. And so I think that's a critical piece of it, is not just controlling this, but building what it is that is a much more solid and real form of information. You and I together, we're sharing all kinds of information right now and all the kinds of different signals and so on and so forth. And so social media doesn't have a chance on that.
Yeah.
But see, that is eroded and atrophied. And so for me, a critical question in movements is how to rebuild that so as not to be just whipped around and be so volatile and unmoored. But we're all exploring this.
Yeah.
But the kind of information that is circulated on social media is very different than the kind of information of one person talking to another. It's qualitatively very different. And so, and I think when it's up against the real thing, it's a different deal.
Yeah.
But yeah, I mean, your point's important.
No, I think the key takeaway of what you just said, and which I would agree with, is that we have to get comfortable going really analog again, right? And just like being like literally physically together with people to do the thing. And that is, going to cut against a lot of what people have become habituated to. Not because they're trying to, but because of the way we've had to adjust, honestly, during a global pandemic, and just like walking back from that is actually something that hasn't really been reckoned with in any part of our society yet.
Some of my students have said they feel overconnected but undercommitted. There was a murmur here. No, but I mean, there's a lot to that.
Yeah, so, some of us feel both overconnected and overcommitted.
Well,
let's take one more question from the mic right here, and then I think Yorit will be wrapping us up with some comments.
Yeah, my question was exactly on misinformation and how we should adjust our organizing tactics. So I'm actually going to pass the mic to the person behind me.
Great, thanks.
Great. I get to do the question. Hi, my name is Daniela. I'm a law fellow at the Graduate School of Design from Ecuador. And my question is, so in many places of the world, as you know, Marshall and Erica, weak and co-opted democracies have failed citizens continuously. And the apathy and distrust in the system prevents the drivers of change. So once you're able to get to a place where you can affect change within the system is so rigged that it's going to take time. It's going to be incremental, and it might not yield the results from the early beginnings, and that can create, anxiety in the constituency and the, growth of the apathy and the distrust. So, in the world we're living now, what, from your book, from your learnings, from your life, how can we grapple with this challenge?
Not easily. To be good. What? No, there's no 1, 2, 3. I mean, it is interesting, though. The presidential system of governance is much weaker than the parliamentary system. It's more given to the creation of kings, whom we call presidents, than the other parliamentary approach, which is collective and it's much more proximate. So when we're operating with presidential kinds of regimes, it's particularly challenging. Because somebody gets in there and then undoes things, and so we're seeing how that works here. That's not a direct answer to your question. I think the constitutional changes that were being proposed in Chile, but they didn't pass, could have helped move in that direction because it's changing the system of governance itself. Boy, otherwise it's really hard, and it takes an understanding of power, understanding of organization, how you deal with the military. I mean, this is not easy stuff. And as you know, in Latin America has been a lot of exploration. We just got a call yesterday from the office of the president of Guatemala, who elected as a progressive and is having these challenges, just like the president of Colombia right now. So this is something we have to work on and figure out, because there are answers, there are questions that don't have answers. That what we do is we engage in finding the answers. In other words, it's engaging in the fight, in the pathways that we can find our way, because there is no blueprint that we can go to. And that does take courage. I guess the other thing I want to say is it takes learning. In other words, one reason that I prefer to work in the domain of practices as opposed to models, I'm sort of the view that all models are wrong, because they're a snapshot of a dynamic process in a particular moment. And when we take them as gospel, then we try to fit people into the boxes of the models, but it's not that. Its practices involve learning on a sustained basis. And so, when we get into any campaign and any project, unless we're building in the learning, not like one day we go, 6 months we have a retreat. Well, this is in a little way what we do in our classes and projects. We always have pluses, deltas, and takeaways. What's that? It's any action after it. We say what worked, what needs to work better, and what did we learn? So that learning is not an afterthought. It's fundamental to the process itself. And that, I think, is the place we're in a lot of places right now. We have to engage in action and learn through the action to find our way.
I can say really quickly, just one thought that occurred to me is that there's always a temptation in this type of context to move to a much more like populist posture. And I think that the danger always is that there's a very fine line between populism and personalism in many contexts. And personalism is almost always going to be antithetical to the democratic practices that are required. And so I think this is all just to say there's like no shortcuts. And
That's a good summary of reality.
no shortcuts. It's even the name of a few books on this.
By Jan McAlee.
Exactly.
Indeed.
So, and that's really true. One of the takeaways for me about so much of what we've been saying is that it's a long game and requires, commitment and leadership over a sustained period by people who are very skilled and very intentional about helping to build leadership and power among those that they engage. And that, it's a generational thing. It's not a 3 months from now be in a fundamentally new world. So,
And it requires sacrifice, which may not be popular to say. But if you're going to decouple from the status quo and challenge it, you have to find your space of autonomy. And that's where sacrifice comes into such an important way.
Yeah.
Yeah, thanks for that.
Thank you.
Yeah, you're right. Do I have one final thing I can say, or is it?
Do we? Yes. Yes, of course.
No,
Keep
no,
going.
no. Look, well, but first, Erica, thank you so much for this conversation. I
Yeah.
really, really appreciate it, and I'm sure everybody does. But we should acknowledge, yeah, Rita. And Jord, of course, for all of the stuff you do, which has been so supportive. But I just wanted to sum up with 3 questions that I've discovered actually define my calling, although I didn't realize it for many years. And those are the 3 questions posed by the first century Jerusalem scholar Rabbi Hillel. When people would go and say, "What do I do with my life? How do I decide?" He said, ask yourself these questions. The first one, if I am not for myself, who will be for me? It's not a selfish question. It's self-regarding. If you presume to enter into relationships with others and lead, you better understand yourself, your values, what you want, what you expect, enough self-awareness that you can actually see others as other than a reflection of yourself. And the second question, though, is if I'm for myself alone, what am I? Because to be a who and not a what, a human being and not a thing, is to recognize we are relational creatures. We're a relational species. We learn in relationship, we grow in relationship with others. And what we do affects others and vice versa. And finally, he says, ask yourself, if not now, when? It's not advice to jump into moving traffic. It's based on the notion that in order to learn to do well what we want to do, we have to risk beginning to do it. Like learning to ride a bicycle, you're going to fall, but falling is an essential step in finding how to keep your balance. And so for me, the relationship between self, other, and action is a lot of what leadership is about, organizing is about. And I appreciate the fact that it was formulated 2,000 years ago. It says something about what it is to be a human being. Yeah.
Thanks, Marshall.
Well, thank you so much, Erica. Thank you so much, Marshall, for all the work that you do. In addition to the book People, Power, Change, which I highly recommend, this week, Marshall came out along with Sarah Al-Rab, who's here, and Anita Krishnan with a practical guide on public narrative, which is available on the Bloomberg website now. You can also download the story about Pete Buttigieg that Marshall talked about in South Bend and how city leaders have adopted and embraced the practice of public narrative. And if you are listening and if you feel encouraged by the call to action and to get engaged, there's a lot of opportunities we have for students from any school at Harvard to become involved in city leadership and urban problem solving. So just talk to anyone here on staff to learn more about the opportunities to become involved. Finally, there are a few more events here. Cities After Dark sounds very intriguing. The role of night mayors in cities. But for now, please join me in thanking again Erica and Marshall.
Thank you. Let me dismount. That was really cool. Thank you. No, thank you so much. Yeah, me too.